Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Forensic Files, and this is Dollars and Cents.
Up next, a body is burned beyond recognition.
There was nothing to identify this person.
But unique construction material provides a clue.
This plaster is not like normal plaster.
I was saying, what is this? It was something I had never seen before.
But who was the victim? And who wanted him dead?
I have to somehow artistically interpret what has changed from the fire.
Just after midnight one Christmas Eve, motorists along Route 83 near Baltimore reported a brush fire just off the southbound lane. A volunteer firefighter was first on the scene.
He climbed down the embankment, which is a steep embankment, and walked his way towards the fire. When he got there, at first he thought it was a mannequin or something of that sort. But as he got closer, he realized it was a human being.
After the fire was extinguished, the victim was unable to be identified other than to say he was a black male.
There was nothing on this person to immediately identify who this body actually was.
The scent of accelerant was unmistakable.
We have found a can that was severely burned next to the body that we believed was used to include an accelerant to help aid the fire. Around the body, further up the hill, we found a lighter that appeared to have been freshly dropped at the scene.
Underneath the body was a partially melted sheet of plastic tarp.
It was a two-person job. That one person carrying a dead human body down that embankment over a guardrail and the distance that it had to go, especially with the icy conditions, no way one person could have done it. It had to be a two-person job.
There's every indication that we had what we call a dump scene where they dumped the body.
The medical examiner discovered the victim had been shot 3 times in the head. The bullets exited the man's skull. Since no soot or debris were found in the victim's lungs, the medical examiner knew the man was dead before the fire started.
It was clear that the hands were duct taped, the feet were duct taped, that this person was being burned beyond recognition.
So investigators took the unusual step of trying to generate a composite sketch from what little remained.
We knew and recognized that until we can identify this victim, we're not going to be able to really get a real movement in the investigation.
Fortunately, the skull was intact. So measurements such as the brow lines, height of the cheekbones, the length and width of the jaw survived.
The victim had received 3 gunshot wounds to the head, so that the teeth, for the most part, were gone. And there was significant burning on one side of the face, charring on the other side of the face, and then a swelling from the intense heat of the fire.
A small part of the victim's cornrow hairstyle remained intact, which helped Detective Lang create a more realistic likeness. Within 2 days, Detective Lang finished his work.
It's a little bit of science and a little bit of art.
Luckily for investigators, if the fire had burned just a little longer, it wouldn't have been possible to get this image.
Another 15 minutes of fire, and it would have been a very different case.
The image was released to media outlets throughout the region. 3 days after the crime, a woman from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania called saying the drawing resembled her boyfriend, 26-year-old Wesley Person.
She commented that the composite did not depict an earring that was in his left ear. That was a feature I intentionally left out of the composite.
Investigators were already familiar with Wesley Person.
This wasn't the first time that I came across Wesley Person. I dealt with Wesley Person about 6 years before this. I was the prosecutor of Wesley for a drug trafficking case.
Person's prints were on file from that arrest and were compared to partial prints that survived the fire.
Most of his fingers had been burned away, with the exception of 2 of his fingers that were partially protected by the garment that had been pulled over his body and used to bind him up.
The prints matched Wesley Person. Investigators now knew the identity of their victim, but to expose his killers, they had to find the actual murder scene. There was no mystery as to how Wesley Person was murdered. He was shot 3 times in the head, execution style. Then his body was set on fire along a highway in Maryland.
They had no witnesses. All they had essentially was these charred remains right off the side of the road. That was really about it.
Investigators learned that Wesley's cousin was one of the last to see him. The two went Christmas shopping together, and he said that Wesley was carrying a large amount of cash.
It was a nice wad of money. I can't say how much it was because I don't know, but he pulled out a nice wad, and when he was peeling, he was looking to see if he had a 20, but he didn't, and all he had was 50s and 100s.
Wesley's cousin said when they were finished shopping, Wesley left with friends whom he didn't know. He said there seemed to be some tension among them.
They go to the back of the car and they're talking. And when they're talking back there, it's an intense conversation.
It wasn't an argument, but you can see that he was talking like he was either frustrated or angry when it wasn't loud.
The 3 men drove off, and the next day, Wesley Person was dead. Police questioned Wesley's family and learned that the men matching the description were Wesley's longtime friends, Justin Glover and Lawrence Morrell. Both men were in their early 20s, and like Wesley, had minor brushes with the law, but had never served time and had no violent offenses.
They had known each other for a very long time. From my understanding, they had known each other going back to when Person lived in New York.
When questioned by police, both men denied any involvement in Wesley's murder. They said they dropped Wesley off at his house, and that was the last time they saw him.
Shopping bags of recent purchases from that morning that Wesley had were found in the house. We feel certain that Wesley Person did make it back to the house.
Police obtained a search warrant and checked every room.
We luminoled that house top to bottom. We could find nothing, absolutely nothing in that house that gave us any indication he was shot and killed there.
Police also checked Lawrence Morrell's car, the one Wesley Person got into after Christmas shopping.
We checked the trunk and the interior of the car for any evidence for a shooting scene, any evidence of trace, blood, or anything. Couldn't find anything in the car.
Then, investigators found a potential clue. At Wesley Person's autopsy, they found some material inside the plastic tarp next to his body.
The medical examiner finds that in the small of the victim's back was a great deal of construction debris that came out of the fire unscathed.
It consisted of small bits of painted drywall and some chunks of plaster.
They were about the size of a thumbnail. And this plaster is not like normal plaster.
What made it abnormal were these thread-like strands embedded in every piece.
I was saying, I wonder what that is. Is this something that's important, or what is this? It was something I'd never seen before, so it was my own, curious nature that led me to pull it out of the sample and then look for it in other samples.
Trace analyst Cassandra Burke extracted these threads and viewed them at 40 times magnification.
And as soon as I looked at them under the microscope, I could tell they were animal hairs.
Prior to the 1940s, animal hairs were commonly used as a binding and strengthening agent in plaster. This meant the murder site was probably in a house built before 1940. Unfortunately, there were thousands of them. On the day Wesley Person went missing, his cousin told police Wesley had been carrying a large amount of cash and left the shopping mall with his friends Justin Glover and Lawrence Morrell. But police wondered, why did Wesley Person have so much cash, even though he was unemployed? A background check revealed Wesley was being investigated for bank fraud by a local credit union, as were his friends, Justin Glover and Lawrence Morrell.
They were involved in a bank scheme, and essentially what the bank scheme involved was using falsified records to obtain loans. And they would take the loan money and pocket it.
The alleged scam utilized a front person, usually a young woman looking to buy a used car. After getting a loan from the credit union, she wouldn't buy the car. Instead, she'd split the money with Wesley Person and his partners. When the loan wasn't repaid, the credit union couldn't repossess the car for non-payment because no car had been purchased. The scam ruined the woman's credit rating, but Wesley and his partners walked away unscathed.
A lot of people in the banking community were giving out loans without a lot of background investigation.
During a 2-year period, Wesley Person and his two partners embezzled about $120,000. Was it possible that a falling out among the three scam artists was the motive for murder?
Disrespect always plays a big part in a lot of the murders that I've seen in this community. If these guys were pure businessmen, they wouldn't have killed him.
A background check of Wesley's friends revealed an interesting coincidence. Lawrence Morrell was involved in the construction business. He'd buy distressed residential properties in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, fix them up, then sell them for a profit.
The victim was wrapped in plastic, construction plastic that would be consistent with someone who's rehabbing a house.
This also might explain the unusual plaster found with Wesley's body. Could one of Morrell's construction projects be the actual murder site?
We found 5 properties listing him as the owner in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. When we began looking at these properties, we were able to determine that 3 of those properties were vacant at the time of the murder.
The property that needed the most work was on South 13th Street in downtown Harrisburg. Record showed it had been built in the 1930s, around the same time builders used animal hair plaster like the kind found with Wesley Person's body.
We're hoping for slugs, we're hoping for bullet holes in the walls, we're hoping for anything we could get. We were unsuccessful.
Investigators sprayed luminol in the basement of Lawrence Morrell's construction property on South 13th Street and ran into an unexpected problem.
As we're looking at that, crime lab techs are explaining to me that in Harrisburg, their soil is iron rich, and iron in itself will give false positives to an aluminum test.
But in the basement, investigators found a pile of debris swept into a corner. They gathered everything and sent it to the forensic lab. Under a microscope, scientists found pieces of drywall with the same blue and pink paint layers as the drywall found underneath Wesley's body.
What are the odds that you and I both went to Home Depot and bought the same paints all the time and painted our walls the same colors year after year after year?
But were both samples the same paint? Analysts put both samples under a scanning electron microscope.
You're using the microscope and all of the features of the microscope to be able to see what's included in that chemical composition of the paint.
The chemical structures in both samples were identical. Scientists also found animal hair plaster. But this wasn't just any animal hair. The animal hair in the plaster found underneath Wesley's body had something in common with the animal hair in the plaster from the renovated house.
I was able to say that these were animal hairs that were from the same animal. They knew that they had the right residents. They knew that they had the right people.
But the ultimate proof came from a piece of ductwork from the basement floor. Testing showed it contained a tiny speck of human blood. And DNA testing left no doubt who the blood had come from.
It ended up being the blood of Wesley Person. We had found our crime scene. We had the victim's blood there.
Investigators felt they knew who planned this attack.
Justin Glover's an idiot. Lawrence Morrell is the smart one here, and he's the one with the brains to be able to put this thing together.
But could they place Justin Glover and Lawrence Morrell at the scene? Both Lawrence Morrell and Justin Glover denied any involvement in Wesley Person's murder. They both claimed they had alibis for that night. So investigators checked the men's cell phone records.
Glover's phone is trackable because he is constantly either receiving calls or he's making calls. And from those cell phone calls, we're able to see what tower, the closest tower that cell phone is going to hit off of.
Glover said he was with his girlfriend.
He made a series of telephone calls to his girlfriend from his cellular telephone, which was not consistent with being with her the whole night.
The cell phone records show that Glover was in the area where the burning body was later found.
And a check of Lawrence Morrell's cell phone record showed he was in the area as well.
At 4:30 in the morning, his cell phone is used right near the Capitol, Pennsylvania, right near the Capitol building, as the cell towers tell us.
Morrell was checking his voicemail. Oddly, so was someone else. At the exact same place and exact same time.
At 4:30 in the morning, Justin Glover's checking his voicemail messages at the Capitol building. It shows, when you look at the cell phone records, that they were together.
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is about 65 miles from where Wesley Person's body was set on fire in Maryland. 10 weeks after Wesley Person was killed, Justin Glover and Lawrence Morrell were arrested and charged with his murder. Prosecutors believe Wesley Person cashed a check for a fraudulent bank loan without telling his partners, and in doing so, signed his own death warrant.
Wesley Person never paid them the money that they were owed. Justin Glover, Lawrence Morrell were supposed to receive at least $1,000 each from each of these loans.
Prosecutors believe Glover and Morrell found out and wanted revenge. They picked him up in Harrisburg, then took him home so he could get the money they believe he'd stolen from them. Then they forced Wesley back into their car and drove him to the home on South 13th Street in Harrisburg that Morrell was renovating. The evidence shows this was where they shot Person 3 times in the head. His blood spattered onto a piece of ductwork on the basement floor. The two men cleaned up the scene, but didn't see the blood on the ductwork. They wrapped the body in construction plastic, unaware that bits of animal hair plaster were wrapped with it. Plaster that tied the body to the house. After driving 65 miles to the outskirts of Baltimore, they hauled the body down an embankment, doused it with fuel, and set it on fire. But the fire didn't consume Wesley's entire body. Enough remained to create this likeness, and the animal hair plaster and construction plastic ultimately led police to the murder scene.
Is that nice pile of debris? Is that the piece of ductwork? Wesley Person's case would be unsolved today.
Justin Glover and Lawrence Morrell were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole.
For them guys to do something real devious like that, it really put a hurt on everybody in my family.
The murder was planned, and so was the cover-up. But they simply couldn't hide all the evidence.
First thing I think of when I think of this case is exceptional forensic investigation. Hands down, the best forensic work I've ever seen in any case I've been involved in.
This is one case that probably encompasses about every genre of forensic science that's out there.
Oh, this was probably the most interesting case I've had yet.
You would think that their friendship would trump money, but it appears as if, I guess in this case, money trumped friendship in this case.